I think what surprised me most when I really got into the reporting of this book was the very personal and deep involvement of President Obama himself in targeted killings. I knew that as Commander-in-Chief, he generally approved the policy and would supervise it. But the fact that he was making individual killing decisions really surprised me. The fact that President Obama, for example, would be pulled out of state dinners by his counterterrorism advisors, or dinners with his daughters to make these very grim calls, really was astonishing. I think somewhat unprecedented. I think there are a couple of reasons that he did this. One was, I think he realized that when you are making decisions to kill individuals whose names you know, whose identities you know, whose addresses you know, that's a pretty big deal for a government to do that. And I think at some level he wanted to assume the sort of moral responsibility of those decisions. But I think there was another and maybe overriding reason. Obama came into office with no military experience, very little national security experience, and yet he'd inherited a military shaped by George Bush, by Dick Cheney, by Don Rumsfeld, that was very much on the offensive and in a very kind of aggressive posture. And this was the president who had been elected, at least in part, to wind down the wars of 9/11, and he was very wary of opening up new fronts. And so I think he wanted to exercise this kind of restraint over the military because he was worried, frankly, about mission creep and opening up kind of new fronts in the war on terror. So I think in some ways that's actually quite commendable. The second thing that surprised me was the extent of the kind of emotional toll on the decision makers, on the people who actually make these very difficult life and death decisions, at least make recommendations to the president, who would then make the final decisions. And I write in the book about, for example, Harold Koh, who was the former dean of the Yale Law School, one of the most revered human rights lawyers of his generation, and yet here he is as the top State Department lawyer weighing in on individual killing decisions. And I think this was a very difficult thing for him, given his background. And at one point he said to someone, "How did I go from being a law professor to being someone involved in killing?" And his counterpart at the Defense Department, a man named Jay Johnson, who I write about, he was representing the Pentagon, so a different institutional interest. They were much more on the offensive, much more willing to do these things. And yet Jay Johnson himself confronted these kinds of very difficult moral dilemmas. I write about his very first targeted killing decision when he's being asked by Tom Donilon, the National Security Advisor, well, what do we do? Can we pull the trigger? Can we take the shot? And he says yes, but he's nervous about it, and he's not fully prepared, doesn't know whether he understands all the issues or understands the law well enough. He goes upstairs later that evening, and he can actually watch this attack unfold live on what the military calls kill TV. And he goes home late that night. He's tired, exhausted, and at one point he says to someone, if I were Catholic, I'd have to go to confession. And so these issues really weigh on the people who make the decisions, and I think that's also a good thing.